Hey there, how you doing today? Thank you for joining me. Today I thought we could have another look at Vienna. It's been a while, right? I've previously talked about housing in Vienna, and I've also talked a little bit about recent urban developments, and I thought today, why not combine the two and talk about recent housing developments, right? And I found this book and I thought it's actually pretty much perfect for it. So, and I thought I'd just give you a quick overview of what I mean with social housing. I have a video I can link it somewhere where I talk a little bit about this part here, sort of innovation in housing in the 1920s and 1930s, the time of Red Vienna, when the Socialist Party came into power in Vienna and created these new palaces of the working classes, they were sometimes called. The most famous one probably being the Karl Marx Hof. Let's see where we find it. It should be somewhere around here. Right, this one here. So this is from 1930, and basically at the end of the monarchy, after the First World War, there was a lot of poverty in Vienna. A lot of people who couldn't afford a home to stay, sometimes couldn't even afford their own bed. The hygienic situation was, I think it's fair to say, pretty catastrophic, and of course same with health. So this housing program was extremely important in order to better the situation of the population. And like I said, one of the examples is this Karl Marx Hof that featured kindergartens, like this one here, laundry facilities, meeting rooms, and even a permanent exhibition showing cheap new furniture for the small apartments. And what I thought was really interesting about the Karl Marx Hof, when you stand in front of it and you look at it, it's massive. It is such a big facade and so overpowering almost. I mean, these buildings do look a little bit like fortresses. But then last year, the city of Vienna published some new photos of areas where they were undertaking some urban development. And one of these photos was of this area here. This is not the exact photo, but it will do for our case. And I thought it was so fascinating how I couldn't find the Karl Marx Hof at first, because it just disappears, seen from above. And the reason is that we do have this massive front here that is 1 kilometer in length. But seen from above, what we notice on the walls, on the sides of the complex, but it's this huge green space here in the middle. This giant park that's just part of the housing complex. All of these trees, the beautiful yards in between. Here, this might be a meadow to play on. And I thought it was just so impressive how spacious the whole thing is. This protected area inside the courts, where you are sheltered from the traffic outside, where you can let your children play, and you have light, you have air. I thought it was really fascinating. Of course, today these kinds of buildings aren't being built anymore. This is very much architecture of the 1930s. And with the Second World War, Red Vienna was over. But the Socialist Party came back into power after the Second World War, and they continued their housing projects with buildings like this one in the 1950s. Doesn't make me feel so impressed. Or with this one in the 1960s. I don't want to say it's Soviet charm because, of course, these types of buildings were built in the West too, but you know what I mean. But there are also some pretty cool projects, like this one here. Wohnpark Alte Erla, this is from the 80s. And these are towers in 3 rows that have a bit of an elephant's foot, I think is what you will call this. With these big terraces and balconies here. And it says these blocks provide housing for about 7,000 people. Blocks are up to 94 meters high. They offer general private terraces, such as these here, and public infrastructure like stunning rooftop pools, like here. That's pretty neat. There are also saunas, preschools, indoor sports facilities, a medical center, and a dedicated subway station. Again, we see quite a lot of green at the center with these paths through the park where you can go for a stroll or walk your dog. They have their own church right in the middle. This here looks like a workshop. And I've looked at this picture here of one of the terraces for a while, and I thought it looks like you're really well protected here. Of course, the people on the other side can see what you're doing, but the neighbors on the right hand side and the left hand side, they can't look over onto your terrace. You don't notice the people above you or below you. You have a lot of space for plants, for growing your own herbs. Maybe you could grow some carrots or leeks here. This looks like an olive tree. And I love how over here on the side, you kind of can't tell where this tree ends and the forest in the background starts. So there's kind of a nice mixture of being part of this larger area and also having your private space, being a little sheltered in the middle of being with all these people. And I think that's worth quite a lot when you live in a big city. Right, but aside, we want to look at more recent developments. And before we look at some more pictures, I think it's a good idea to have a look at the start of this book and to have a look at this list here. And find out what Vienna is actually trying to do with these housing projects. So there are 10 principles that exist for any new project that gets created. And some of these are quite interesting questions. Number 1, we have continuity and innovation. How can a housing system that has developed over almost 100 years guarantee the implementation of fresh technical, ecological, and social innovations? So like I said, the housing projects of Vienna date back to the 1920s. Then you have the issue of social mixing. How, in the face of severe economic pressure and heavy immigration flow, can a social mix be achieved that prevents the emergence of social or ethnic ghettos and contributes to the creation of a cohesive society? Then this part here is something that I find very interesting about developing new urban areas. How can housing be connected to the provision of social infrastructure? How do a large number of apartments become an urban area? Can urban planning reflect the former use of an area? And can it contribute to creating a new identity? Then we have diversity and integration, the questions of how can housing policies respond to the challenges of an increasingly diverse urban society? Diversity including different cultural backgrounds, different lifestyles, varying forms of family and all age groups, as well as residents with special needs. How can floor plans facilitate housing for rapidly changing family patterns? I think this is something that we kind of tend to overlook. I know in Vienna we have a lot of elderly people, and a lot of them live on their own. And I think especially with age, it's important to still feel like you belong to a community, that you're not isolated or alone. So I think it's really important to address that when building houses, when building those accommodations that we live in. Something I've noticed when I was looking for a new flat last year is this part here, citizen participation. What models help to enhance the participation and empowerment of residents? How can participatory approaches reach all groups of residents, including the hard to reach, so to say, the socially weak and the disadvantaged? There are some really, really cool projects that I'm going to show you towards the end of the video. Then, of course, a very important part, environmental and climate protection. In Vienna, they're looking at low energy and passive buildings, as well as generally holistic solutions for cities in the 21st century, at mobility patterns, consumer patterns, etc. This is a bit of an issue with houses in Austria in general. They've been built to keep the heat in because we've had harsh winters and are not really equipped for harsh summers. Then we have the use and design of public spaces. How can the planning of public spaces be connected to the planning of housing? Do more and better public areas compensate for smaller floor plans? Are community areas increasingly replacing vast private areas, reflecting the current trend from a society of owners to a society of sharing? I kind of hadn't connected these two at all until now. How can the design of public spaces respond to the needs and habits of different age groups or of residents with a different cultural background? Do public spaces contribute to communication and integration? And of course, this I think too is a very, very important question. How do we move through the areas that we inhabit, and how do those areas shape how we interact with each other? And one question that keeps popping up quite often in Vienna around this topic here is, do we have to consume when we are in a public area? Or are there areas of recreation where you can just sit down, relax, spend time with friends, and not have to consume something? Right, then of course there's the question of developing existing housing stock, ideally without gentrifying them. Then we're going to look at this number here, building on the outskirts. Can new housing in fringe areas help reduce urban sprawl and further suburbanization? Are there alternatives to single-family housing? And last but not least, the role of art. Can the arts help create identity and a community feeling in the residential areas? How can residents be involved in artistic interventions, and can works of art help us understand the history and present of a particular place? And indeed, that's something really nice when you look at these old Gemeindebauten. They always have really colorful murals They have beautiful statues in the middle. There are design elements throughout the entire architecture. So this has always been a really important part of the way that housing was created in Vienna. Well, and why are these questions so important? Because Vienna is growing quite a lot. This here is a report from 2007, and it suggests that Vienna is going to grow by 4.65% from 2010 to 2025. So basically Vienna is growing from a city of roughly 1.5 million in the second half of the 20th century to probably soon 2 million people. The advantage that Vienna has is that it's had 2 million people before, around 1900, so the basic infrastructure is already there. But of course, that's infrastructure from 100 years ago, and you do need to update quite a lot of things. Right, there's some more interesting graphics, but I think we're not going to spend too much time here on this part. I'd like to look at 4 areas in particular, and I think we're going to start off with the Sonnenwendviertel. So the Sonnenwendviertel is an entirely new area that's been created over the last 10 years, something like that. I'm going to show you where and why exactly. But let's start off with this house here, because I've passed by this facade a couple of times and I always thought it looks really weird. If these are the balconies, yeah, they're not particularly inviting, all things considered. Kind of have these grey squares. And I didn't really understand why it was built that way. But turns out the street here is quite busy. You can see there's a bus stop here, so you also have the sound of the bus, you have a lot of traffic. And what this facade does with this strange arrangement of balconies is that it's actually a buffer zone between the building itself and the proper apartments and the street, and that ensures that the apartments themselves are quiet and sheltered from the noise outside. And here in the back you have the actual galleries with open spaces for private use, you have communal areas, you have a green inner courtyard. So the part that we're seeing that's facing the street is probably very different from the side on the back, where people are invited to actually sit and relax and enjoy their life. Another one in the same area in the Sonnenwendviertel is this part here, which consists of 3 different houses created by 3 different architects, 3 different designers, and they've been arranged in a way so as to provide basically a park on the inside. A space that is both sheltered, that is quiet, but that is also spacious, where you can spend a lot of time, where you might have a picnic here, you can let your children play, you can just sit and relax. What's pretty cool about it is that these 3 houses are connected with one another by a so-called runner level on the 4th and 5th stories. And on their stories you also have some common spaces which can be used by any of the building's residents. Swimming pool, sauna, communal kitchen, cinema, youth club, workshops, playrooms, etc. So I think that's pretty fascinating. You can see here, this is where the communal kitchens are located. Here you have a climbing wall and a vertical playground. Here's a play den with some pool tables and some play areas for children. There is a cinema and an indoor learning club, as well as an outdoor learning club, a book club, and the workshop. So you have some infrastructure that invites you to spend time with other people, with your neighbors, to actually get to know them and talk to them. And I think that's actually pretty cool, to not be completely anonymous while you live next to one another, as is so often the case in cities. Right, and I said I wanted to show you where this Sonnenviertel actually is. Here we have another one of these gorgeous pictures from above. In my video about changes in the last 15 years, I've mentioned that Vienna has a new main train station. You can see the roof of it right here. This is a through station, so the trains come from one side and then they can continue towards the other side. But previously, those were two terminal stations. You had the trains coming in from the south and from the east, and they both stopped here. And it took up a lot of space. So when the new station was constructed, all of this space was opened up. And this is where this new area has been built. I think that the building I mentioned at the start, I think it's that one with the weird balconies facing the streets. Might be wrong though, but I think it's this. This part here is going to be the park. It's already looking a little better than it did here. This was still in the middle of the construction area. And I just quickly want to show you some other bits and pieces here because it's a really cool photo. Here on the side you can see the Arsenal, which is a former military ground. Today you can live in these buildings, also pretty cool. You have a beautiful Baroque castle, the Belvedere, Upper Belvedere and Lower Belvedere, with Baroque gardens in the middle. We have a famous Baroque church, the Karlskirche, also quite an iconic building. And in the background we can see parts of the Hofburg. This is the Neue Burg. If you're interested in the Hofburg, I can link my video on it and you can find out about the many areas and many buildings that are part of it. Here you can see what it's going to look like in the end. You have the park, the Sonnenviertel train station, and some more parks on the other side. So this is an area that is quite central, obviously. But urban development is also about the outskirts of Vienna. And one project I've mentioned before is the Seestadt. And there are some pretty cool photos in there of that area. So I think they should be right here. No, sorry. Right. So you can tell this too is a construction site. This is the lake that gave its name to the Seestadt, the lake city. And you can see the underground line here in the background, that was actually built before construction started on the buildings themselves. It says that it's Europe's biggest construction zone, and the first 2,500 apartments were finished in 2014, but I think it's going to take at least until 2029 for it to be finished. My impression is it's going to take a bit longer, but we'll see. This is what it's supposed to look like in the end. You have two underground stations, 1, 2. You have the lake at the center with, again, some beautiful parks around it, some green spaces where you can spend your time. And then you have a mix of residential buildings, of businesses. We have some non-residential uses, so it might be open spaces, squares, parks. We have places for research and development, we have social infrastructure, and we have culture, of course. And here's a photo of it. So this part here was somewhat finished, but as we can see on the map, it's going to go all the way around the lake. So construction is going to take a couple more years. And of course, when you move there, you have to be aware that you're moving into a construction site, which is why it's looking like this, a little empty, a little grey, the trees still being very small. But we won't know what it's really going to be like for another 10, 20, 30 years until the entire place is really lived in and the trees have had time to grow. It's going to be green. You're going to have all the different shops and maybe a theatre, all kinds of associations, people working together. But when I went to visit the Seestadt last year, it really looked like a thriving neighborhood. I thought it was really nice. I actually thought about moving there for a bit, but in the end it is a bit far out for me, and I think not quite what I'm looking for or what I want from an area that I live in. But I do think that this could work out pretty well. They also have some innovative projects like this building here that's made of wood. This part here is called the Canyon. It looks like you can try some bouldering here for the kids. I really like this look. It looks quite warm and inviting. It serves as a meeting point and play area. And it says it's an outstanding example of both livable density and the inexpensive implementation of complex geometries, as well as a showcase for innovative urban wood construction. I don't know if this book is sponsored by the city. You might be a little biased. Right, and then there's another project in the Seestadt I want to show you. Not this one. I'll find it later, but this is what I meant. You're moving into a construction site. It looks empty at this point, and when you imagine the trees having grown and really being tall and giving shadow, it's going to look very differently. So personally, I often think that I would appreciate a bit more of a radical approach to kind of open up more of this grey area for more green, to have more green here in the facades. I do think you could do a good deal more, but maybe that's still coming. Right, then I think the project I want to show you comes later. I'm just going to show you another area first. One that I've also mentioned previously. Here, the Nordwestbahnhof. So here construction started in 2018. And you can see again, this is a massive area. 44 hectares. We have the Augarten behind it, with one of the flak towers that you might remember. I've mentioned these before. This too is the area of a former train station, and you can see I still have some train lines here on the side. And here in the corner you would have the Danube. And you're looking towards the inner city that would be here in this area. Now, the Nordwestbahnhof, I think, is quite interesting because it's based on the principle of urban wilderness with an open center and a diverse edge. So the way this is going to be constructed is that you have all of the housing blocks on the outside with the tram lines running through in the middle and this wilderness here at the heart, just a giant park with lots and lots and lots of trees and open meadows and, you know, something for nature to kind of take its own part. And I'm hoping that this is what, that this is going to look like the way I imagine it. A little more radical, a lot more green. There's also going to be 7 towers, and they'll be positioned in a way so as to minimize the shadows cast on neighboring buildings. It's also built in a way so as to incorporate neighborhood knowledge. So it's not entirely new, it's meant to really be integrated into the area. There's going to be 4,000 apartments with about 8,000 residents and 2,500 workplaces. And yeah, I'm really curious to see how this is going to go. Right, and these are the projects that I wanted to show you. This is in the Nordwestbahnviertel. It's called Wohnen mit Schaf. And this is about resident participation. So here, future residents have been invited to work together with the architects and the developer to really have a say in how this house is going to look like. What communal areas do they want? What's the floor plan supposed to be like? So it was designed in collaboration with the residents who met individually with the architects. There's going to be 40 apartments as well as a number of common spaces such as a rooftop terrace, a sauna, children's playroom, communal kitchen and event spaces. And another interesting thing, the residents founded an association at the start of the project and then purchased the final building from the developer. And there's actually going to be a number of projects like this. So this is in the Nordwestbahnviertel. Right, this is the one in the Seestadt. And this one in the Sonnenwendviertel. And I think they all work based on the same principle. You have an association with all the residents. They are in regular contact. They decide what they want in those houses. I looked at one project that's also going to have some co-working spaces they're going to have some guest rooms that you can rent for when you do have guests and you need an extra bed for someone to stay the night. You have communal kitchens, etc. But you also have your own apartment and you can just close the door when you need some quiet time. And I think that's a pretty cool project. Of course, working together with all of these neighbors can be difficult, so they aren't left on their own. There's actually some mediation, and there are associations by now that help the residents to really set this up to be successful with it. Here's another one in the Seestadt. Doesn't that look really, really neat? I really like all this green here. But then the city, of course, also has to build for not just families or elderly people, but also for people who are in urgent need of housing, such as this house here, the Neuner house. This is a house for formerly homeless people, and the Neuner house is an association that operates shelters and traditional housing. The housing first approach practiced by Neuner House regards stable living situations and social services as prerequisites for independent housing and living. And last thing I'd like to have a look at with you is this floor plan, because I spent some time looking at this earlier and I kind of got really fascinated by how every single one of these apartments here looks different. So when we come up the stairs, let's go up here past this balcony, and we have the first unit here with the kitchen here in the corner right next to the bathroom. Next to it we have a larger area with 2 rooms with a separate bedroom, the larger dining area, kitchen here and bathroom here. Here we have the kitchen in this little corner here, behind the bathroom and the bed, near the windows. Here we have a little closet in this corner, the bed tucked away here behind the bathroom of the other place, and the bathroom of this unit is actually here. Right, here we have the kitchen right next to the entrance. Here's the bathroom, the bed again tucked away. Here's the communal place. Here we're going around the corner to get into the main area with the kitchen here next to the bathroom. And here's the bed, and you can look out through the window. Again, the bathroom, the kitchen, and the bed. They really all look a little different and all quite inviting, I think. And for small units like this, it's quite neat. You never have the kitchen right next to the bed, which I've had to in some places, which can be a bit annoying. You do have at least a room in between, or maybe even the kitchen tucked away in a corner. So that too, of course, as part of these social housing projects. But I think that was quite a lot of information today. So let's leave it at that. What do you think? There'd be so much more to talk about, of course, but I'm sure that you're already drifting off to sleep. And the candles are leaving us too. So let's close up this book. Let's blow out the last candle. Thank you for watching and good night.